So we'll end this part of this lecture with a bunch of commands that we can use to log in remotely and then execute commands on the remote machine. So we looked at the FTP command. What that does is it's mainly used to transfer files, but you are actually executing commands on the remote machine. So for example, you're CDing around in the remote file system. You're getting files from that FTP server down to your local machine and so on. The first command that's described is one that is really no longer used, although you will find this command available. The problem is not exactly that the command doesn't work or anything. It's just sort of unsafe these days, mainly because the telnet command uses the telnet protocol, which sends a username and password in clear text, that is just standard ASCII. And this is unsafe because anyone who uses a program to look at network traffic can actually see your password and then use it to log in as you, for example. So you don't want that to happen, and so a lot of servers will disable telnet access. Even though it is available, most servers will disable it. Okay, so having said that, we'll go through telnet and then we will look at what the alternatives are, because we know that telnet, chances are it will not work. Telnet allows you to log in into a remote server, and when you connect to the remote machine, you are prompted for a valid username and password. Once you're authenticated, you get a shell prompt. So at that point, you would be able to run shell commands just as if you were logged into that machine, right at the console. We will use this for servers, and typically servers won't have a single console or a single keyboard and display. What it'll have is it'll allow network access in from remote users, and then the users can run commands on that machine just as if they were physically attached to that machine. So once you're logged in, you can enter commands and interact with the remote system. So once again, as with FTP, you need to know host name or IP address, and then the username, and then the corresponding password. So for example, you would say telnet to some IP address like this, internet protocol address, or you can just say telnet return and then open, just like we did with FTP. So if you try this, chances are you won't be able to connect to anything, hardly. Let's try the one that we used with FTP. So you will get this message typically, telnet to a valid address, and say unable to connect to remote host. So that's the standard response that you will see from just about any server, because most servers will disable it. So let's try one that we will use in our course, 248 Csis. So if you don't have the address, or if this doesn't work, you can contact the instructor, and the instructor will tell you a valid IP address that you can use. In this case, you can see it's trying, but eventually I think the message you will get is that you're unable to connect to the remote host. So while that's running, let's go back to our notes. You can see if you wait too long to log in, the connection will be lost and you will have to telnet again. You can use the control close square bracket to switch from the remote host back to your telnet screen if you wish to. So assuming that you did have a valid telnet server that actually ran telnet and accepted connections, and you had a valid username and a password, what will happen is that login program that's running on the server will be replaced by bash. And from that point on, you will have bash or some other shell. You can also log in and use telnet from Windows, although these days usually people use a program like PuTTY. So let's skip that part. And let's take a look at some of the remaining commands, and we'll look at the alternatives. So it turns out there is a command to do a remote copy. So this is sort of like FTP and telnet sort of collapsed into one command. So you can use RCP or remote copy to copy files between systems. It looks and acts like CP, but you can copy files from other systems or to other systems. The basic syntax is the same as for CP. This is RCP source, and the source can be remote or local, and the destination file can also be either remote or local. So you can copy from the remote machine to your local machine or the other way around. So here's a simple example, RCP. Here's the name of the host, and then you say colon, and then absolute path, or you can use a relative path. And then if you hit return without the destination, it will copy to your current working directory. On the other hand, if you say RCP and then the source is a local file called, in this case, called report, and the destination is a remote folder, then your local file will get copied into that folder on the remote machine. Note a couple of things. The colon is what separates the host name from the path or the file name. So you can also copy from one remote system to another remote system if you want to. And the thing that you have to have is, in addition to the IP address, you have to have a valid username and a password. If you try to use RCP, note the error message is that, well, the error message you will get is that you're actually using SCP. So you can say, well, what's going on? What is RCP? It looks like it's there, but if you say file /user/bin/RCP, you will see that it's actually just a symbolic link to this, and then you want to follow that link, etc/alternatives/RCP. You will see that this /etc/alternatives/RCP is a symbolic link to userbin/scp. So essentially what happens is that whenever you type in RCP, what you're really going to run is SCP. And what is SCP? It's the alternative to RCP. And we'll go over that in just a second. I just want to point out that there's a couple of other programs that are described in the book. So like RCP, there's also RSH, it's a remote shell, which used to be very commonly used, but there were a few security problems with remote shell. And so as a result, if you try to run RSH, what you actually run is SSH. Okay, so note that, and you can follow the links the same way as we did with RCP. We will look at the alternatives. We look at SSH rather than RSH. And the very last slide in this set of notes is about rlogin. This is also one of those things that is no longer in use in most Linux systems. If you say rlogin, what you will see is that what you're really using is SSH. Okay, so I just want to point out that a lot of the commands that are explained in the book and in the notes don't quite work like as they're described in the book. Instead, we have to use commands like SSH. So let's take a look at that. Let's say SSH, and I'm going to use my username at this remote server US, and the first time you try to connect to it, you'll get a message like this. Are you sure you want to connect to this? It looks like you haven't established that this is a real place that you really want to go to, stuff like that, and you say yes. Okay, so then it actually changes some information locally on your system. Now you have to type in your password. So you have to use some other username, but probably the same IP address. If you're not sure, contact your instructor. Okay, and if you are able to log in, you will get some kind of message of the day like this, followed by some welcome message, and then finally a prompt. This is just your bash prompt. So right now you can access, you're running commands on the remote machine. So if you say ls, you're listing files on that remote machine. If you say pwd, you get the remote current working directory on the remote machine. You say who am I, and you get your username on the remote machine, and so on. And so you can execute just about any command that you want and have it run on that remote machine. So pwd, I'm not sure what else to run at this point, but you can try, once you have access to your account on the server, run just about any command. Here you do have to be careful. So unlike the live DVD, if you remove something, for example, if you touch XYZ, that is, you create an empty file. If you remove it, it's gone. And so if you have files on your remote machine, probably you don't want to remove it because you might need them. And also you don't want to mess around too much. Let's see, this -L8 to list all the files. There's a minimal setup here, so it's a lot fewer files than on the live DVD. It's just a very simple setup. And so you probably don't want to remove these because you cannot, for example, if you remove .bashrc, you probably will get in some trouble. That is, things might stop working, and then your account becomes unusable. So I'd say be very careful about removing anything on your remote machine unless you're sure you know what you're doing. Unlike the live DVD, you cannot just reboot the system and have everything working again. The live DVD is a nice system where you can experiment with this kind of stuff, but the server account is not something that you want to do these kinds of operations on. Okay, that's it. I'm just going to exit. We saw how to log into that and execute commands. If you want to quit, you just say exit. Now there's two more commands that you want to know about. One is just like the remote copy, and actually you can use RCP, but just be aware that what you're really doing is saying SCP. So let's say I have a file. Let's choose a small one, my big file. So SCP, my big file. I'm going to copy this my big file to 248 Csis.us and copy it to my home directory. And it'll ask me for my password. Type in my password and it transfers the file. So rather than using FTP, if all I want to do is copy one file from my local machine to the remote machine or the other way around, I can use one single command.